Today's topic to understand is design name resolution for virtual network. And whenever we think about name resolution, there is only one thing that comes in mind. If you are thinking DNS, then you are correct. Because we are humans, it's tough to remember all the numbers. For example, now we do not have phone numbers. Remember, we have phone directory in our phones. Similarly, we cannot remember the IPs of all the websites that we access. So what it does, this DNS will help us to convert IPs into name into IPs and IPs into name as per the different records that we add in the DNS server. Right, so this is the absolutely basic idea for name resolution. Let's start from the perspective like we have two DNS. One is the public, another one is the private. Public DNS and private DNS. And as per the name, this is what exactly these are. For example, if let's suppose this is Azure, and in this Azure we have one app service. Let's suppose this is our app service, okay, and it is running some abc.com website, okay, and there is some guy sitting in the internet, not inside the virtual network, no private connectivity that we explained in the very first video. This is somebody who is sitting outside your private network, which means this guy will access abc.com from here, and request will go over the internet like this. But this abc.com has nothing, no idea what IP and things like that. So there is a public DNS server somewhere which will provide the IP address of this app service. This will go to DNS servers and this will come back with the IP address, and then this will go over the internet to connect to this app service. This is the absolutely basic idea of DNS. Since this is coming from the internet and the DNS hosted in the internet zone or public zone, that's why it's a public DNS. This is public DNS. Clear? Now let's suppose this is the virtual network inside our Azure. This is Azure. This is virtual network. Okay. Now you could also see like there are a couple of virtual machines. There are one virtual machine. There is two virtual machine, and this is hosting abc.com again, or maybe xyz.com, but it doesn't have any access to the internet. But this guy wants to access xyz.com. Then what it will do, xyz.com, and there is some DNS server here as well in the private zone, DNS server, and his request, private request, will go to this guy, and it will give you the private IP address back to this guy, and then it will connect to the xyz.com through the private IP address. That is your private DNS. Clear? Now we need to understand these things from the perspective of Azure. So what happens in Azure? In Azure, DNS zones are a feature of Azure DNS. Now, this DNS server is hosted somewhere and somebody is maintaining all the infrastructure. Similarly, this DNS server is hosted inside your virtual network and you are managing the entire infrastructure, the patching, the security, and everything. But when you go ahead and create Azure DNS, Azure DNS. That's a wonderful service that you can utilize. Azure DNS. So you can create the zones. You can create zones. Again, the private zone and the public zone as per the public DNS and the private DNS. Right. So if it is a public zone, public zone. So what are we hosting here? We are hosting DNS records for the domains accessible over the internet. So public websites, public sites, you could say. Right. Wonderful spelling I did here. Public. Okay. Now, since this is a managed service, what it is a PaaS service or managed service, which means this is managed by Azure and we are not managing any hardware or any uh, infrastructure which is hosting the DNS. We are not doing any of these things. So we are not doing this. It's a managed service. Azure is doing this. So this is the beauty of utilizing this service. The second point is these are the key features, right? Managed service. Then another point is it is globally accessible. It's geo, it's globally accessible. Records in a public DNS zones are accessible to any client on the internet. Then we can use this DNS. It's like you can create all the possible records which is needed to smoothly run your website. It's not like you can only create A and not the CNAME or the text.mx or ns. Right. Now, if in a simple example, let's suppose there is a company which owns the domain uh, example.com. Okay. And we have created the A record for example.com on the public zone on Azure DNS. This is the A record example.com. Now what will happen? This guy, if this guy tried to access example.com, the request will go to Azure DNS and Azure DNS will provide the IP address, then it will go to the example.com. Let's suppose this app service is hosting the example.com. Now similarly, we also have private zones. So what are we doing with the private zones? We are accessing the privately accessing the private websites, getting the private IP address to the DNS zones. So this is used to manage DNS records for internal resources that are only accessible from within private network. Right, internal within private networks such as Azure Virtual Network right here. Or maybe this guy wants to access xyz.com or example. Let's suppose this xyz.com is the internal website, and in the private zone we have created this xyz.com a record for the xyz.com and linked this private zone with this private zone. Let me do this. This private zone with virtual network so that these will go and talk to this zone and resolve it. Right now, let's suppose this guy wants to access privately this one, then what is needed? A tunnel is needed. Tunnel to what? Tunnel to the virtual network, VPN tunnel. And once the VPN is connected, then it can access privately this with the help of private zones. Right. So this is what it is. Name resolution for virtual network. This is the foundation so that we can start design name resolution for virtual network from the next video. I hope it was useful. Thank you for watching. Take care.